I'm Leonora, founder of My Bubba, and you're listening to Parental Control, the monthly podcast from My Bubba, where we discuss issues that affect mums and dads throughout parenthood and tease out the solutions with the help of some brilliant guest and expert speakers.
Hi, my name's Ellie Thompson. I'm editor at My Bubba, and today I welcome ADHD counsellor, coach and author Sarah Templeton to the show to discuss ADHD in young children. Sarah is the managing director and lead therapist of Headstuff ADHD Therapy, the biggest team of ADHD diagnosed counsellors in the UK. We delve into the nitty-gritty of spotting the signs and symptoms of ADHD personality traits, the impact of ADHD on education, friendships and family life, and we discuss how schools are dealing with our ADHD kids and why children aren't being diagnosed early enough and what we can do at home to help. Hi Sarah, it's so lovely to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm extremely well today. How are you?
Oh, I'm good, thank you. Thanks for asking.
Pleasure.
We've got you on to talk about all things ADHD.
Yep.
So I guess best thing to do is start at the beginning. You're an experienced ADHD counsellor and you have ADHD yourself. Tell us a bit about your childhood experience and your background and what inspired you to get into the world of counselling.
Okay. Well, I was not diagnosed ADHD till I was a few weeks off my 52nd birthday. So I went through literally 52 years not knowing I had anything wrong with me whatsoever. I'd never come under mental health services. I'd never been referred by a doctor for anything to do with mental health or any issues like that. At school, I was very, very bored, but I was polite because I had a mother at home who was very, very strong. So I didn't do anything like skipping school, not handing homework in, smoking, going out with boys. I was the model student, literally did everything right, always handed my homework in, was very, very hungry to learn. I was, really, really like a sponge. I was desperate for knowledge and information. But the biggest impact of my undiagnosed ADHD at school was that when I took my 12 plus, I failed it. And I wasn't supposed to fail it. I was in the top third of the class and the top half of the class passed. So before the results even came out, my headmaster appealed it with the council, the county. Then when the results came out, my mother appealed it and they both came back and said, no, she's failed so spectacularly, we can't put her through. So I ended up going to a very, very rough secondary school where I was bored stupid. I was amongst 100 girls or 120 girls who weren't interested in learning. They were interested in boys and having babies. And I was interested in learning. So at the end of the first year, when I came first in maths and first in English out of 132, actually, that's how many girls were in our year, the headmistress rang my mother and said, this child shouldn't be at this school. And I didn't know that till I was 16, but she'd actually got me a place at the grammar school. My mother didn't take it up because she couldn't afford the new school uniform, having just bought a whole new school uniform than a year before. So I didn't find out till 16 that I'd spent 4 years at a rubbishy secondary school. The reason I'd failed my 12 plus was because I had undiagnosed ADHD, but more importantly, undiagnosed dyscalculia. Now, dyscalculia brains can't do problems. And because the 12 plus was made up purely of problems, my brain just didn't understand it. It was like, Ray's got 3 green apples and Isabel's got 4 blue apples and 3 green bananas. How many pears has Rachel got? And my brain just goes, well, I'm not interested and I don't even care. And because that was what the 12 plus was made up of, I just literally wrote down random answers. And it wasn't till I was in my late 50s and I was diagnosed with dyscalculia that I thought, oh my God, that was why I failed my 12 plus. And that was why I failed it spectacularly, because I didn't just fail, I hadn't got a clue. So every answer was just a random answer. And my headmaster had actually said at the time, if this had been English, maths and French, she'd have sailed it. So wow. My undiagnosed ADHD and dyscalculia and my severe dyspraxia, which I've since been diagnosed with, and my sensory processing disorder destroyed my education, is the answer to your question, because I should have been at a very good grammar school around here, and I would have been had there been allowances made and had I been given a different test at 12. But because I had the standard test with everybody else, which was problems, not a hope. So I ended up with 4 O levels, when I probably could have got a good 6 or 8 if I'd gone to the better school. Basically, at my school, I took every O level I could. I couldn't even take O level drama, which was my strength, because my teacher wasn't qualified to take it. So she could only take me to CSE, and I got a CSE grade 1. but I couldn't even get any more O levels than I got, and I did get 4. But I could have done a lot better educationally had my dyscalculia been identified, which is why I am now so massively passionate about children being recognised and diagnosed young, because I could give you 1,000 stories, tens of thousands of stories of people's educations who've been destroyed for very similar reasons to mine.
Yeah, my brother actually has the same story, but with dyslexia in the 80s. And my mum fought like every day and every night with his homework. Or he was like you, really keen to learn, didn't want to be bottom of the class, just destroyed his education and his self-esteem, really.
I really feel for him. Sadly, the sad thing about that is you'd like to say, you know, with me it was in the 1970s, and you'd love to say, well, that was in the 1970s, but it's all changed now. But it's not. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. Nothing's changed.
And that's what I've been hearing more and more from talking to experts like you, that actually it's still the same battles. And I've got a 5-year-old daughter, and I'm suspecting that she might have ADHD, and I've sort of known there's something going on with her since baby age. She's always been very frustrated, very bored, very full on, and just
sort of restless.
Yes, it's like reading homework every night, and you know, she's just like, will do the least she can do, unfortunately, although she does.
I'll give you a little tip there. A little tip: give her a reason for doing it. If she can't be bothered because she can't see the point, with ADHD people, if we can't see the point, we can't stimulate our brain. So if there's something that she particularly likes, let's say, I don't know, let's say she particularly likes certain books, you know, give her the reason for learning to read. To say, look, if you learn this tonight, this is going to make reading that book that you loved so much easier. You need to give her a reason, a point to doing that reading, and once she's got her point, whatever it is, that will stimulate her brain to do it.
Yeah, but anyway, going back, like you've got a great new book out, How Not to Murder Your ADHD Kid, which funnily enough, Maddie saw on my desk and said, what does that title say? And I was like, never mind. But why did you decide to write this book, and why is it such an important one for parents of ADHD kids?
I decided to write it purely because I was saying the same thing over and over and over and over to clients, parents, and all of them were lovely, but all of them had the same issues with their ADHD kids, obviously with, you know, variations, but it was all ultimately the same issues. And the parents weren't understanding the ADHD brain, pure and simple. So when I was explaining to them, look, this is how we think. We do feel we know best. We do want everything our own way. We do hate authority. We will push boundaries. We don't think of the consequences. Numerous parents, and I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of parents, were saying to me, oh my God, I wish I'd known this all my, you know, since he was born or since she was born. If only somebody had written this down in an easy to read format and I could have read it. And after the 999th, I thought, this is ridiculous. I've got to write this down. I thought there were loads of ADHD. I mean, there are loads of ADHD books out there. There's hundreds of them. But what there isn't, apparently, is one written by somebody with ADHD in very non-scientific terms, because I'm not scientific at all. So I just wrote it from my ADHD brain. You know, I know all the traits. I've looked them up. I've Googled and I've got them myself. So I explained in very normal, basic English, this is how your child thinks. And if you interact with them this way, you'll get the best out of them. If you do it that way, which they'd all been doing, which was traditional parenting ways, it'll just get worse. So what really finished it was, there's a lovely lady who's a counsellor. She's not ADHD, but she's got an ADHD son. And she stood on my doorstep one day. This son, I was seeing him at the time. I think he was about 17-ish at the time. And she stood on my doorstep in tears as a counsellor. And she said, Sarah, if only I had known this since he was born, this would have made my life and his dad's and his brother's so much easier. And she literally cried as she left. And I thought, this is mad. I thought people knew all this stuff. I thought there was 1,000 books out there on ADHD, but obviously not one that talks about it from the ADHD brain's point of view, you know. And I can say to people, look, you know, we do always want everything our own way. That's just the way our brain works. So you don't have to give an ADHD child everything their own way, but you do have to manage that trait in them. And if you do it this way and offer them this, that, and the other, and that's why I wrote the book, because to me it was so obvious, because I'd obviously lived with ADHD for 55 years before I wrote this book. And I just assumed there were other books out there saying all this stuff, but it became apparent there weren't. So I wanted to write the book for all those clients' parents that I was working with. And I also wanted to do it from a very positive point of view, because there are quite a lot of people out there who've written books on ADHD behavioural management. There's this big thing about ADHD being a behavioural disorder. It is not. It is a neurological difference. It's a different brain wiring. Exactly the same as autism, but a different brain wiring to autism. So autism doesn't get called naughty child behavior condition, but ADHD does. And it's very unfair, because our traits, some of them, do cause what other people perceive as naughty behavior, but it's ADHD traits causing them. And if the parents can understand this and manage it, and just accept that their shirty little 13-year-old is going to think they know best, is going to want everything their own way, but if they manage that, you're going to have a much more harmonious life. And that's what I wanted to do. And the deepest joy for me is when people read that book. I've written two now. I've written one for teachers as well, but the one for parents, I get so many parents who say to me, I've literally read your book. I've put everything you said into action within a week, and our whole household has changed. We're now all happy. We're living harmoniously, and I'll never be able to thank you enough. You know, that just blows my mind, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to just help parents understand. My mother never did, for example. She used to say to me all through my life, why does everything always have to be your way? And I think, well, I don't know, but I just want it to be, you know, that's just how I want it to be. I didn't know that was an ADHD trait, but now these parents do, and they manage them, not saying they give in to all of them, but they manage them properly. Suddenly households are transformed, you know, and that just literally blows my mind. So I'm thrilled I wrote it. But then what happened was, so many of these parents were saying, right, you finally somebody understands my son or my daughter's brain. I've given the book to the teacher. Yeah. And literally hundreds were saying this. And I suddenly thought, this is a wasted opportunity. There's a lot more I could put in there that would help teachers. So I stopped writing my book on ADHD teenagers, which was half written, and I rewrote the first one with all that same information about this is where their brain works, this is how to manage them, but I added in stuff for teachers, so how they could manage it and do things differently in the classroom and get a better result. So that's the second book, has literally just come out last December.
Oh, I'm so glad that you've said that, because they don't seem to understand. They don't seem to get that training. And I mean, we had parents' evening in October, and she's in year 1, so she's 5, nearly 6 in the spring. And I said to them, she fidgets. I think she has ADHD. Oh, you know, they sit on the fence with it. But she keeps saying, I like to fidget. I like to fidget when I read. I like to fidget when I learn. And she's saying that. I've not told her that that's what she should do, but she's already that.
Well, she's a clever little girl then, because she's realised that by fidgeting, what she's doing is stimulating her brain enough to concentrate. So by fidgeting or doodling or having something in our hand all the time, I was a doodler at school. I used to draw great big boxes and then colour them in. Yeah, just to stimulate my brain. But she's very clever, because she's already realised that by keeping something moving, that actually stimulates the brain enough for it to concentrate. If you ask your little girl to sit stock still and concentrate, she will find it so hard. But something I'll tell you now, and this will help your listeners, you do not have to have a diagnosis for reasonable adjustments to be put in place. So you can put in writing to your school that you firmly believe she has ADHD. You've done a lot of research. She's just on the pathway now to diagnosis. And these are the reasonable adjustments you want put in place until she has that diagnosis. And they cannot, as long as they're reasonable. So having something to fiddle with, or a wobble cushion, or a stress ball, or something in her hand, if you explain to them that without that, she's going to be much more badly behaved because she won't be able to concentrate. She'll then start rocking on her chair or scribbling on the desk. It's much better to let her have that reasonable adjustment to allow her to concentrate. But that's exactly what's in my teacher's book, because you're right, you're absolutely right. Teachers are not trained in this. We've done a lot of surveys. And one teacher who only qualified 2 years ago, who herself is autistic and ADHD, she said, Sarah, in 3 years teacher training, we had 3 hours one morning of neurodiversity training, and that was everything. ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, the whole shebang in 3 hours. And that's good. Some don't get any at all. But my company of counsellors, we go into schools all the time now training. Schools are actually starting to realise, we get a lot of emails from headmasters saying, we began to realise there's a lot of ADHD kids in this school, and we also don't know what to do with them. So can you come and train us? So me and several of my team, there's about 8 of us, we go into schools training teachers. I'm going in March, I'm doing 3 infant and junior schools in one evening in Bucks. So the teachers who are becoming aware of it are on the whole very open to it. They realize that they've had no training in it, and they are either buying my book. The book sells every single day on Amazon, every single day, so teachers are buying it, which is fantastic. But also we're getting invited into schools every single week. We get at least 2 or 3 inquiries every week from different schools. So we are, and that's not just us. There's a lot of other organisations in this country that are going into schools training. So we're hoping this situation will change. We're trying very hard to get it changed.
So going back to the types of ADHD, there are 3 different types. Can you just give us an overview of what they are?
I totally can. Yeah, there are 3 different types of ADHD. Well, in this country, it's diagnosed. ADD is a phrase that's been dropped in diagnostic terms in this country. Used to stand for attention deficit disorder without the hyperactivity. We don't diagnose ADD anymore. I think they still do in America, though. We, in this country, diagnose ADHD in 3 categories. So we have ADHD primarily inattentive, ADHD combined, and ADHD primarily hyperactive and impulsive. That's the 3 categories. The smallest category is ADHD hyperactive and impulsive. That's very, very small, and it's usually boys. It's boys who have all the hyperactive traits, all the running around, jumping up trees, risk-taking, thrill-seeking, pushing boundaries, but they don't have any of the inattentive traits. So they don't forget things, lose things, drop things, break things, have poor short-term memory. They're very switched on. And you usually find those boys, for me, it's always been men that I've worked with that. Both of them owned massive motorbikes, the 2 that I'm thinking of. They were massively adrenaline seekers. So that's your hyperactive and impulsive, tends to be boys. The second category is ADHD inattentive. Now, that used to be thought to be mainly girls. That's not true. There are just as many boys with inattentive ADHD as there are girls. And I have a brother who has inattentive ADHD. We have the same mum, but different dads. And he's inherited his father's inattentive ADHD. I've inherited my father's combined ADHD. So boys, just as much as girls, have inattentive ADHD. But the characteristics of inattentive tend to be people who are in their own heads. So the dreamers, people that you would describe as away with the fairies, always in their own world. They're usually massive procrastinators. They struggle to get anything done. They describe doing anything as if it's like walking through treacle, and they describe their brains as being kind of surrounded by fog, so brain fog. So everything is a humongous amount of effort. That's inattentive ADHD people. And then the combined, which is actually the biggest category of all, and is the one that I'm in, we have enough traits of the hyperactive and impulsive kind and enough traits of the inattentive kind to warrant a diagnosis of combined ADHD. And that is by far the biggest category.
Right. Okay. And what are the first signs to spot in kids? And when do you start seeing these sort of characteristics?
Well, that's interesting, because an article I was asked to write about 6 months ago was ADHD in toddlers. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's a challenge, but I can do it. The very first signs to look for, very first, are babies that don't sleep or seem very restless and their eyes are darting around all the time. We've had parents who've reported that babies almost from birth have been trying to lift their head up to see what's going on. You know, they've been very interested in the world. So babies who are very, very, they don't seem to need a lot of sleep, and they're very active when they're awake. That's babies. Also, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, is something that can show up very, very young. We've got triplets in my family, and one of the 3 triplets is ADHD. And right from day one, he had a different nappy to his 2 brothers. So he would go through patches of diarrhea, and then patches of severe constipation. So his mom had to go to the doctors and get, you know, all sorts of different things to help him. And she could never work out why he was so different to his other 2 triplets. But we now know they're 10. It's very obvious that he's the one with ADHD and the others aren't. So different nappy habits is another thing to pick up really early. Then when they start to get a tiny bit older and they're toddlers, I can speak about this because my brother has got a 4-year-old, and even since he's been 2, this little boy, he has never sat down. So whatever we go to, family picnic, dinner, whatever, he's up, he's moving, he's walking, he's constantly looking at things. If we go for picnics, he walks around fields going, oh, he's constantly fascinated by another leaf, another flower, another fly, another bee. His brain is constantly on the go, and he can't sit down for literally more than a minute for her to feed him a yogurt or something, and then he's off again. So when they're toddlers, it's the restlessness, it's not being able to sit still. So if they're at nursery, let's say, and the teacher says, right, let's all sit on the mat and I'm going to read you a story, the ADHD child will be the one that's fidgeting, that keeps changing their position. So they might put their legs one way, then their legs another way. They might be kicking their leg or moving their leg, or they might just get up and move. You know, they might get up and walk to the back and pick up a book or something. So it's restlessness you're looking for in toddlers, and that goes across the board. So that's your inattentive, your combined, and your hyperactives. They will be restless. They will want more, and they will get bored, and they will get distracted. So if there's a little boy on or a little girl sitting on the mat, and all the other kids are looking at the teacher and one isn't, they're looking out the window, that's the ADHD one. In fact, I've only found very recently a picture of a school play that I was in. There were 100-ish people in this school play. It was a massive production, great big picture. Every single child was looking at the camera, and I was looking backwards. I was looking at the other people, and I thought, whoa, there it is. Right, going back, I was about 12, 13 when that picture was taken. I was the one not looking at the front, So that's the very early signs: different toilet habits, restlessness, not being able to sit still, being distracted, and fiddling. If they're fiddling, also another very good easy thing to look for when they're very young. Nearly all ADHD people have got sensory processing disorder. Nearly all, about 8 or 9 out of 10. So when my niece, who's ADHD, when she was tiny and I was putting her tights on, and the seam at the bottom, she would be wrestling me and going, no, they're not comfy. I'm not comfy, because the seam on the bottom of her tights, she was finding it irritating. So tiny kids, if they refuse to wear woolen jumpers, or they won't wear ties around their neck, or they're constantly pulling things away from their body, and labels, if they don't like labels and they're pulling at labels and going, cut that out, I can't stand it, it's itching. Kids can be doing that from 2 or 3, and that's a sign of sensory processing disorder, which is indicative of ADHD. So that's the very first things to look out for.
Yeah, and going back to children and young kids and toileting, number 2 and number 1 accidents, are they a thing with ADHD kids? Like,
they are, for a variety of reasons. Number 1, because IBS, and if you've got IBS, my IBS didn't kick in till I was about 17, and that's when I went to work, I think, and then I got a bit stressy and a bit anxious about work, so that's when my IBS kicked in. But it's not unusual for IBS to start with babies. They can have it right from day one. So IBS can be the reason that they have accidents, because they don't get any notice of when they need to go. But also, believe it or not, distraction, because it's boring. Going to the toilet is boring. Nothing exciting about going to the toilet, pulling your pants down, doing, washing your hat. All of that is very boring. So a lot of ADHD kids will just put it off because they can't be bothered to do it. And then they will have accidents. Yes, definitely.
That's so interesting, isn't it? It makes
And
complete
yeah,
sense, really, doesn't it? But
Yeah.
what about being dry at night? Is that something ADHD kids achieve later on, or is that not a thing?
it can be. It's not a massive thing, but it can be. There's a variety of things that can go on at night for kids. Some of them, inattentive ADHD children, they sleep very deeply. Usually, they can sleep forever. My brother used to stagger us. He used to come home from work on a Friday, go to bed, sleep all weekend, and get up on a Monday and go to work.
Wow.
So honestly, inattentive ADHD people can sleep like you would never believe anybody could sleep. So those children, if they're in a very, very deep sleep, often, yes, they can have accidents in the bed because their brain doesn't wake them up and tell them you need to go to the toilet. It doesn't actually do that. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason is literally can't be bothered. Procrastination. Oh, I need a wee, but I can't be bothered, and then they'll have an accident. So I wouldn't say it's massively common with ADHD people, but it does happen. There are some kids that will have more accidents, put it that way, because either they can't be bothered, they procrastinate, they're distracted, and they don't even notice they need to go to the loo, or it's just too boring and they can't be bothered. Yeah.
It's also very familiar. How do you know when you just have like an enthusiastic child versus having one that has ADHD? When does it become more serious than just being a part of their personality?
When you see the other traits, because obviously neurotypical people come in all shapes and sizes, and you get loud ones and quiet ones and busy ones. It's when the official reason for receiving an ADHD diagnosis, because this is very relevant to what you've just said, is when your traits impact your life. Right. So if you've got a chatty neurotypical child, you've got a chatty neurotypical child. If you've got a chatty ADHD child who literally cannot shut up and has got verbal diarrhea and constantly talks when they're not supposed to be and is constantly being told off, that's when it's impacting their life. So do you see the difference? It's got to be, let's take falling over as an example. Every child falls over at some point. I fell over on a very regular basis. I was so excited about my first day at school when I was 5. I tripped and fell over on my way to school, ripped my brand new red tights, got them covered in blood, had to be taken back home, washed down, new socks put on and taken. So people like me with ADHD and dyspraxia, we will fall over and do more damage to ourselves than other people. So it's kind of levels you're looking at. You're looking at whether something really stands out and is quite excessive and quite extreme. That's when, let's take my brother, for example. He's inattentive. Actually, it's funny what you're saying about your daughter not wanting to do it. The very first sports day we went to, me and my mum, to watch my 5-year-old brother in his sports day with his inattentive ADHD. One of the games was they had to walk up to a hoop and put a beanbag in it, walk back, pick up another beanbag and put it in the hoop. Yeah. My brother obviously thought this was a total and utter waste of time. So even at the age of 5, he looked scathingly at the teacher, scathingly at the beanbags, and he walked up very slowly to the beanbag and threw it in and very slowly walked back. He didn't race. He wouldn't. He just did it because he knew he'd got to, but he had zero interest in doing it. He couldn't see the point, and my mother and I were like, oh my God, how embarrassing is this? He was, people were laughing because he was funny, because he was like, another beanbag. Okay. Picked it up, walked up in a foul mood, throw it in the hoop. So that at 5, had I now known what I know now, that was an indication of him thinking, what's the point? There's no point to this. This is going to put me in a foul mood. I didn't know it.
It's so funny you mentioned sports day, because last summer was Maddie's first sports day, and she just turned 5, and out of the whole school, which is a good school, I feel like I've sort of talked it down, but overall it's a great school. But she was just a clown. She didn't want to take part in anything seriously. She was just messing about, like doing these funny moves and just taking the absolute mick. And when it did come to her turn, she just wouldn't try. She'd chuck the ball, and everyone was laughing at her at first, and it was funny. And then this sports day went on for like an hour and a half, and this behavior just kept going on, and I got to the point where I was just like, this is bad. Everybody's like, what's she doing? No other child in the school is behaving like this. And
Yeah.
she just I don't know, she saw it as a being on a stage and entertaining. She couldn't be bothered to do it.
Oh
So
yes.
she was just messing about, and
Yeah,
our
100%.
parents were laughing at her. It's just
That's so ADHD, because if we can do something and we can do it well and we're going to get praised for it, we'll do it.
yeah.
If we know we're going to be a bit rubbish, well, we'll just entertain you. If there's a crowd there, and if she did one thing that made them laugh, one thing that would have fed the adrenaline in her brain, and she'd have thought, oh, hello, they're liking this, I'll do a bit more.
There
And
was
then she'd
no
have carried on.
No stopping. I could not. You took her aside, Maddie. Calm down. Try and calm down. Like try and do something sensibly.
There's something called rejection sensitive dysphoria, and only ADHD people have this, and it means we're particularly affected by rejection, and in particular humiliation. So if there is any chance of us being humiliated, even from a very young age, we just won't do it because we don't want the humiliation. So she worked out that actually I'm not going to be terrific at the javelins, but they're laughing at me, so I'll just carry on doing funny things here. That was her, and it was feeding the adrenaline in her brain, which she doesn't have enough of, because that's what ADHD is all about. We don't have enough dopamine. We don't have enough of the happy hormone. So if she was doing something that was making her happy and she could see other people laughing, that would have been feeding her brain, and there would be no way she could stop doing that, because the brain is compulsive. So as soon as you start to feed it a bit of adrenaline, it wants more and more and more and more. So she would have just carried on doing it until they stopped laughing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's just and what about ADHD? Does it affect like a young sort of preschooler, an infant school sort of age child? Does it affect their ability to read and write and learn in those early years? And does it?
The ADHD doesn't, but the highly likely comorbid or coexisting conditions do. So if I just tell you that the phrase is ADHD is a big umbrella and a lot comes under it.
Yeah.
And another phrase that you'll hear a lot of is that ADHD rarely travels alone. Now, what they mean by that is 80% of people with ADHD have at least one comorbidity or coexisting condition, and 50% have at least two or more. So when I was diagnosed with ADHD, that was all I was diagnosed with. But as I carried on working with clients, loads and loads of them would talk about certain things, and I think, well, I've got that. I had one lovely client who was talking about her dyspraxia, and I thought, well, I do that and more. So I went off and paid for private assessments for dyscalculia, dyspraxia, and sensory processing disorder, and I was diagnosed with all three.
Wow.
And my dyspraxia is severe. I've got 1% processing and 1% motor skills. Now, all of those three things, in answer to your question, of those three things, it was the dyscalculia that affected my learning. So will an ADHD child be affected? Largely, yes, because it's highly likely they've got one of those coexisting conditions. The big coexisting conditions, by the way, are dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, which is numbers dyslexia, and dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is one that a lot of people haven't heard of. Dysgraphia is in simple terms, it's when the message from the brain to the hands is distorted. So these children, they can have all the information and all the answers in their head. They can be very, very bright, but they can't write it down. And they can't even type it on a computer. Wow. Or anything. They can't get it out of their head. Now, luckily, dysgraphia is relatively rare, but I've met clients with it, and it's crippling when they've got this, and they don't understand why. I mean, for example, one of the boys was 29, and I worked out he'd got dysgraphia, and we were with his mum, and when I explained it, she said, "Oh my God," she said, "is this why when we were doing his homework all his school life, he would have to tell me the answers and I would write it down? He'd have it all in his brain, but he wouldn't write it down." I said, "Yeah, dysgraphia."
Wow.
But the school hadn't picked that up, and that boy tragically ended up going to prison 16 times, and largely because he thought he was stupid and gormless and hopeless and couldn't write, couldn't go to work because he couldn't fill forms in or apply for anything, and ended up going to prison 16 times. He's now diagnosed, and he's been out of prison for 2 years. He's on the medication, and he won't be going back. But can these comorbidities affect learning? 100%. Another very dangerous thing, Matt Hancock at the moment is trying to get a dyslexia bill through government.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is to get Matt Hancock to realise that he's also ADHD. I've never met anybody with dyslexia who isn't also ADHD.
Wow.
So what happens with dyslexia, we have to be very careful about this, is people who are diagnosed with dyslexia often put all their issues, their struggles, their difficulties down to the dyslexia. And it's not. Dyslexia is a comorbidity of ADHD.
That's
so
interesting.
yeah. So any parents who are listening to this who've got a child who they think has got dyslexia or is diagnosed with dyslexia, I always say dig deeper. I've yet to come across anybody with dyslexia who isn't also ADHD. And this happens a lot with girls. Girls get diagnosed with dyslexia and they just think, oh, that explains everything. And it doesn't. They've actually also got ADHD.
That's just mind-blowing, actually.
Yeah.
Wow. God, there's so much we could talk about. I've got another question about ADHD and food. Is there a particular relationship with food that kids have when they've got ADHD? Anything we should be looking for in terms of that?
Yes, because we go back to sensory processing disorder here. So the 8 or 9 out of 10 that we reckon have sensory processing disorder with their ADHD, they will have issues around food. I do. So these kids will have very strong views on what they will eat and what they won't eat. And the worst thing you can do is force them to eat it. My mother forced me to eat a couple of things and I literally threw them straight back up. Because if we've decided that something is something we hate or we can't eat, our body will react very strongly. So I've met kids of every persuasion. I've met children who only like crunchy things, who only like soft things, who only like sweet things, who only like savory things. I've met numerous children who will eat with their hands. They don't like using cutlery. I've met a lot of ADHD children who don't like sauces or anything wet of any kind. They don't want anything on their dinner, even tomato ketchup. It's wet. They don't want wetness near. Other things that you hear about a lot are things touching. So you'll often with ADHD kids, it's a good idea to put things in little bowls. Tapas style dinners work really well for ADHD kids because then they can pick the bits that they like. They will often not want their baked beans or their peas on the same plate as the rest of the food. One of the kids explained it to me, said, I don't want those leaking into my dinner. I want them separate. So they will not often want things all together on one plate. They'd rather have them split up. So there's loads of ways that ADHD impacts on food. I'll tell you a couple of mine because, I'm 59, but I've been like this all my life. I won't eat anything wrinkly. So currants, raisins, prunes, sultanas, anything wrinkly, the feel of it in my mouth is just disgusting. So I won't eat it.
I can understand that when, squashed flies and stuff. I don't mind them, but I get it. I get that.
Yeah, it's horrible. Also nuts. Nuts to me just taste like cardboard. Can't eat nuts. No, they just taste like wood, a cardboardy wood. I can't eat nuts. And this always makes people laugh. Avocado. Now, people tell me avocado is lovely. I look at it, to me, it's green slush. So I have never put it anywhere near my mouth and it won't be going near. So we make some very odd decisions around food based on what it looks like, what it feels like, what it smells like. Another one for me is goat's cheese. I cannot stand the smell of goat's cheese. So whenever I go out for pizzas with people, I beg them not to order anything with goat's cheese on. And if they do, I move to the other end of the table because it makes me feel very sick. So a lot of ADHD kids have got a lot of issues around food, and it's really best not to battle it. There are a lot of ADHD kids who will only eat beige food. I've met one child who would only eat pasta. So his mother had to try very, very hard to get some vegetables and some nutrients into the pasta. But really all he wanted was plain boiled pasta with a bit of cheese on top. That's all he wanted every single day for every single meal.
Yeah, that sounds like Maddie. She's got food groups that she'll eat and then she doesn't want to explore beyond those. Whereas our 3-year-old boy, he's happy to try anything, whereas she'll be like, no. We changed meat because she loves meatballs. So we've been having meatballs too much. We're like, let's try turkey ones because they're better for you than beef. Tried those last night. She was like, not eating them. She was doing this and like, I can't eat that. Disgusting. Whereas like Billy didn't complain, he just ate them, probably didn't even realize there was much difference. She seems very aware of how things taste, if things taste different or something's not quite right, or she can taste it. super
100%. Let me just tell you one quick story that'll make you laugh. There was a dad who brought his son, and he told me the story that this kid loved fish fingers, absolutely loved fish fingers. And then the brand, whichever one it was, changed the sort of fish that was in the fish fingers. And they gave him his fish fingers for his tea, and he had an absolute meltdown. And he basically said to his dad, "It's the wrong kind of fish. I can't eat these now. It's the wrong fish." And his father was like, "Oh, for goodness sake, it's still white. Can't you eat it?" And he's like, "No, can't. They've ruined my fish fingers." And I'm a bit the same. When people change recipes, you know, sometimes they'll say improved recipe on whatever. And normally I'll taste it and go, "Well, they've ruined that. Thanks very much. Not eating that anymore."
Bourneville chocolate they've ruined. Doesn't taste the same.
Yes.
Absolutely horrible now. But with food, and you were saying about the forks. Now, my husband tells off Maddie a lot for eating with her hands. Should we be doing that, or should we be just thinking, well, eat with your hands then, it's fine?
I wouldn't force her. What I would do is allow her, next time you're in a very nice shop, to see if there's any really nice knife and fork and spoon that she would like, you know, a colourful one or a child one, and see whether she'd like it. It's got to be her decision though. And just say, "Oh, look, that's a knife and fork that, you know, what do you think of that?" And if she goes, "I like that," because it's pink or it's yellow or whatever colour she loves, you could sort of encourage her to try. But it's one of those things that they say that's a battle not worth fighting. If she's actually eating and getting nutrients into her body, that's the important thing. So as she gets older, she will realise that, oh, everybody else is using a knife and fork here and I'm standing out. She won't want to stand out. So she will naturally gravitate then onto using cutlery. But I worked with a 12-year-old girl once who used to eat everything with her hands still. And she had a particular love of roast dinners. And I said to her one day, I said, "How do you even eat your roast dinners with your hands?" And I said, "Isn't that a bit messy?" She said, "No, not at all. I just don't have the gravy."
Oh, bless.
So, you know, it's quite standard for ADHD kids to really love eating with their hands. And when you've worked with as many clients as I have who are having major battles at getting any food in at all, you will realise that letting them eat with their hands is perfectly fine as long as they're getting the nutrients in. That's the important thing.
That's interesting. And what about empathy? Because last night we usually take it in turns to read each child a book every night, so we'll swap. Like last night I read to Billy, then I'll read to Maddie tonight. Last night Maddie came in because she wanted to join in with Billy's book, and he's got a cool bunk bed and we climb up and we all sit together, and she's been wanting to do that a bit more. She came up onto the bed and we settled down to read these books. She suddenly went, "I feel really bad for Daddy," because obviously my husband then went downstairs and he wasn't needed and she didn't want to read a book with him, and he was fine. He's like, "I'll go and start dinner." But she was absolutely devastated, and she kept saying, poor daddy, poor daddy. I said, "Just go down and speak to him, give him a cuddle. He's absolutely fine." But it really hurt her, and she just was so worried about it. She went to bed really upset after the book, like half an hour later.
Yeah, well, there you go. ADHD people have more compassion than others. And we don't like causing pain to other people because we know how painful rejection sensitive dysphoria is to us. So what she was doing was realizing how hurt she would feel if she'd been left out, and then she gets upset because he's been left out. I remember going to a cafe with my dad when I was about 5 and being in floods of tears because there was a man sitting at a table eating his dinner on his own. And my dad was like, "What on earth's wrong with you?" And I said, "That poor man, he's on his own. He's all on his own. He's got no one to eat his dinner with." And my dad, I'll never forget this. I was literally 5 or 6. He said, "Oh, for goodness sake," he said, "he's got a wife. She's just cooking something tonight that he doesn't want to eat. So he's come out for his dinner and she's at home having hers." And that made it all right for me. I was like, "Oh, that's fine then. As long as he's got a wife, I'm fine." But it really upset me to the point of tears that there was just this poor chap who was probably having a lovely night on his own, having whatever he wanted, you know, perfectly fine. I was distraught because he was on his own and I was 5.
I know.
So that's what's going on there. We feel for other people, and because we realise how she was realising how hurt she would feel if she was left out, so that makes her upset for her dad and she feels sorry for him. ADHD people, neurotypicals don't like it when we say this, but it is true. ADHD people have more compassion for other people. We feel things deeper and it hurts us. So because we know how hurt we get, we are very good at understanding how hurt other people get. So it won't surprise you to know that the top job for ADHD people is paramedic, because
Really?
we care. Yeah, we care very much about other people. And also a paramedic feeds the adrenaline, because there's nothing more exciting than going on in an ambulance with a blue light flashing to something you don't know. You know it's going to be awful when you get there, but you don't know what it is. Talk about adrenaline flooding. And then, so it's very exciting, but it's also, we can use so much of our caring and compassionate side. So ADHD people nearly always end up in the caring professions. You'll find doctors at chock-a-block, nurses, paramedics, firemen, loads of firemen clients I've had, and police. Because the police that go into it because they care and they want to help people and they want to help keep people safe, loads of the police are ADHD as well. So anywhere where there's caring and compassion, that tends to be an ADHD person's natural home.
That's so interesting. Oh, just keep saying that, but it really is. It's so interesting. In terms of friendships, what can we expect here? Is it harder to make friends? And do ADHD kids get more obsessive over certain friends?
100%. Yeah. Friendships is a big subject, but if I sort of sum up how it can go, friendships with ADHD people, a lot of ADHD people struggle to make friendships. That's for a lot of reasons. They're very all-consuming. They get very absorbed in the person. They hyper-focus basically on somebody that they really love, and they want that person to be their best friend. And then they don't like it when that person's friends with other friends. And then they can get upset. The rejection thing can come in because, oh, she's talking to that person more than she's talking to me. Perhaps she's not my friend. And then we can get very rejected and feel very hurt. So a lot of ADHD people struggle to make friends. That's a fact. And they also say things impulsively, like, oh my God, you look really awful in that dress. You really don't look nice in that dress. And then we think, oh God, that was probably hurtful. But we've said it because impulsively it's come out. Right. So they can lose friends quite easily. I've lost friends over the years by saying things that I shouldn't have said. You know, at the time, in that split second, it seemed sensible. With hindsight, I shouldn't have said it. And I've lost maybe 3 or 4 very good friends over the years because I've said things that I shouldn't have said. But I said it impulsively. On the other hand, though, you will find that ADHD people, because we're good fun, because we're risk takers, because if anyone's going to do the silly thing, you know, anyone's going to push the boundary and do that thing, it'll be the ADHD person. So the reverse of that is, a lot of us, and I include myself in this, I've got loads of friends. I've got absolutely tons of friends that go right back to when I was, in fact, tomorrow night, I'm out with 2 friends. I went to that bloody awful school I went to. I'm going out with 2 of my friends from there that were nice people. So, you know, and I'm 59. I was 12 when I met them. So a lot of us have good friends that go back a long way. And I've got a very, very wide circle of lovely friends. But the interesting thing is, I found out since all of them are ADHD. Wow. So we gravitate. Yeah, it literally all of them are ADHD, and I've gone on to get tons of them diagnosed. So your daughter will gravitate towards anybody interesting, not boring, you know, and it will be the neurodiverse. Sometimes also ADHD kids make quite good friends with the autistic kids, because again, the autistic kids aren't boring. You know, they've got their own neurodiversity, their own way of doing things and looking at things. So you'll often find the neurodiverse kids, even with different conditions, will gravitate towards each other. But it's very much the 2 extremes. Either ADHD people are good fun, a good laugh, always up for anything, and they keep their friends forever more, like me, although I've lost 2 or 3 along the way, or they struggle massively. And then you'll get some ADHD people, particularly inattentive ADHD people, who aren't interested in friends at all, don't want them. They want to be on their, they find life so exhausting. My brother's a very good example. They find life so exhausting that when they come home at the end of the day from work, they do not want to see anybody. They do not want to go out or do anything. They are quite happy with their own company. So it's the whole spectrum really with friendships. But why do ADHD people lose friends? It's primarily because we get obsessed and we don't want them to have other friends. Yeah, it's because we want everything our own way. So we want every game played our own way. We want every dressing up session to go our own way. We want to wear the dress that we want to wear, you know, so we can be quite controlling when it comes to friends. And some don't like that. Some are fine with it. Some don't like it. And we can say things impulsively and upset people without meaning to. And that's quite a big one. You know, I know a lot of children that are distraught because they've said one thing and their friend has cut them off. But it happens. So it's a mixed bag. with friendships, can be difficult, can be easy. Another very interesting fact, this is massively helpful for parents. If you've got a child who is struggling to make friends at school and you think, oh my God, they're going to be a social outcast for the rest of their life, don't panic about it. We tend to make our friends through shared interests. So, for example, I've always been into drama and acting and amateur dramatics and all the rest of it. And nearly all my friends are from there. I've met them all from different drama groups, different plays I've been in, my little drama school thing I went to when I was 16. That's where my friends have come from, because we've got that shared passion. So I always say to parents, don't get overly worried if your child isn't making friends at school. It's when you join them up to a ballet class or a boxing class or any sort of activity that they are very interested in, they will then find friends in that activity who share their passion.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty much like anybody, isn't it? You just find your people, don't you?
You find your people. Yeah, you do find your people. Yeah, definitely.
I'm just wondering, how can you help a child who can be quite obsessive?
I think if you always keep it positive, if you say that's absolutely wonderful, but don't forget there's other lovely people as well. So try and see some other lovely people, because you never know, you might find somebody even nicer than whoever it is, but always keep it positive. So just say, yes, fabulous that you get on so well, I'm so pleased, but don't forget there might be other nice people out there. And also, this is when you can play into their compassionate side. So if there are any children who don't have friends, who are left on their own, this is when you can say, what about that little girl Lucy? She's always sitting on her own. Wouldn't it be nice if you two went and had a little chat with Lucy sometimes? And the compassionate side should make her want to do that.
The emotional roller coaster, is this a thing? Because it is a thing in our house, from literally 0 to 0. Is that worse with ADHD children, or is that just
times 1,000? Yes. Yes, because we one of the things we have from birth is something called emotional dysregulation, and this is for the non-scientific, because I am really not scientific. This is because the bit of the brain that is supposed to regulate emotion doesn't work in an ADHD brain. So when I told one of my very young teenage clients that, he said, is that why I cried when my dog died and not when my nan died? And I said, yes, it's exactly that. Our brain can't regulate or choose the appropriate amount of emotion for a situation. So our emotions will go up and down all the time. And I've got bad news for you. It gets way worse in puberty, way worse. Because, way worse, way. And also I've got even worse news for you. It's better for boys, because boys are within puberty, absolute the emotions I can't begin to tell you. And when we're talking about emotions, we're not just talking about crying, we're talking about anger, frustration, irritation, feelings of resentment. So every emotion you can think of will be very dysregulated and in an ADHD brain. So for boys during puberty, it's off the scale. This is why the young offender units are full of ADHD boys, which is one of my goals in life, to get them all out, get them diagnosed and medicated. But they go in there because during their teens, they're very dysregulated. So somebody looks at them the wrong way, they punch them, or they kick a door, or they punch a window. So they end up being done for criminal damage or a fray or these silly little things. And then they end up in young offender units because of their ADHD dysregulation. So ADHD boys, teenagers, you have to be really, really careful. Massively make sure they're medicated, because that medication is a protection against them ending up in trouble. It's very easy for ADHD teenage boys to end up in trouble. Girls, not so much. Obviously, there are a little portion of girls in prison, the vast majority not. With girls, the emotional dysregulation tends to be getting very upset about things. Your example of your daughter on the bed, upset about her dad, brilliant example of emotional dysregulation. That was something that she didn't need to be upset about, but in her brain she was, because she's dysregulated. Although you said, look, daddy's fine, he's cooking the dinner, he's absolutely fine. For her, no, it was upsetting, so she got upset. So for girls, the reason I say it's worse is because ADHD is affected by hormones massively, because dopamine is a hormone and ADHD is connected to not enough dopamine in the brain. So with girls, Sadly, we've got all the stuff that goes on through puberty, just the same as boys, but we've also got it every single month when we have periods. Then we've got pregnancy when it can go off the scale, and then we've got menopause. So our hormone changes in our bodies go on up until our roughly early 50s. So for girls, it's a much more dysregulated emotional journey through life than it is for boys. By the time boys have hit 20, 21, 22, they can pretty much regulate, most of them, their emotions. Girls, it's going to be up, down, up, down, up, down every single month until you come through menopause. Now, luckily, I'm through menopause. I was diagnosed smack in the middle of menopause, which a lot of women are. 51 I was. But now I'm through it. My moods are even, and I'm also on ADHD medication, but my ADHD dysregulated brain is as regulated and my moods are as even as they have ever been in my whole life. But it took for me to get through menopause to get to that point.
It's just so unfair, isn't it? All that time.
Very.
Just awful.
Yeah, very. The only thing you can tell, if all the mothers are going, oh my God, at that point, there is good news. The good news is that if you get your daughter on the right medication, it will massively help with all of that. It does regulate the dopamine and regulate the hormones. And as you need to see doctors when, let's say you've got a teenager and you think, oh, they need to go on the pill or they need the coil or whatever, you really need to see a doctor who's very aware of ADHD in women and how the hormones can affect it. Because obviously the pill is hormones that they're putting into your body. So for example, we have one coach, Adele, who works with us, who specializes in women and hormones. So we have a lot of women and girls book in with her to get on the right pills and to get on the right medication, taking the female hormone issue into account. Because again, this is something that hasn't been taken into account, hasn't even really been noticed to about the last 5 years. But now they're noticing that women suffer so much more with their ADHD dysregulated emotions because of their own dysregulated weeks of the month, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. What a nightmare.
I know.
And when you mentioned ADHD medication, what's your take on that? Because it's something I've not really looked into, because I think you hear that. What's that drug they always used to say? Ritalin. Yeah, that's it. Not retinol. Ritalin.
Okay. Well, before I was diagnosed, I would have been one of the people saying, "Oh, you don't need to medicate little tiny kids, and it's wrong," and all the rest of it. Since I've been aware of ADHD and the medication, I am 100% for it.
Really?
Because all you are doing, well, for starters, ADHD medication is the most efficacious of any medication in the whole world, either psychological or physiological. And the reason it's the most, literally the most efficient, efficacious medication there is because it's the only one that puts back into the brain what is missing.
Right.
So if you think, let's take Maddie, let's say we're going to put the meds into her at whatever age, and then she's going to be on an even playing field with absolutely everybody else. If you don't put the meds into your daughter, what you're in effect asking her to do is act against her natural ADHD tendencies 24/7. Wow. So you're going to be asking her to not be distracted when her brain wants to be, to concentrate when her brain doesn't want, to focus when her brain doesn't want. Her short-term memory will be appalling without medication. She won't be able to retain the facts. So revising and studying and exams are just going to be a nightmare without the medication. Friendships, we just talked about those. She won't be impulsive if she's on the medication, so she's likely to lose less friends. And every other trait there is going to be helped by her being on the medication. So for me, excuse me, a few years ago, I had a phone call from a head teacher rather, who was trying to get a mother to bring a daughter to see me. And the mother was very reticent because she didn't want the daughter to be ADHD. But the headmistress, who was a bit more switched on, she said, I have told that mother that it is tantamount to abuse if she doesn't get that child diagnosed and medicated. Wow. So, and she's right, because it is. If you've got a way of putting your child back on an even playing field, and that will help them get better grades, keep friends, not be impulsive, not be emotionally dysregulated, not have anxiety, not have depression. therefore not be open to self-harm. Also addiction. If you're not medicated, you're way more prone to addiction. So why would anybody do that to a child? You know, it almost is abuse and neglect in my eyes now if you don't let your child try ADHD medication. There are a very small portion, tiny, that don't adapt well to it and have to sort of do go other routes. But the vast majority of children respond extremely well. Here's a brilliant example for you. A very good friend of mine, one of these that I've had for 30 years, and we've only now just worked out she's ADHD. She's got a son who's 13. Yesterday, she rang me to say, I've got to tell you, when I last saw her, he was on some medication that wasn't working. And I said, it's the wrong one. You need to change it. That's not working for him. Change it to one of these brands. She wrote it down. She asked the doctor. Yesterday, she got a phone call from his science teacher. He's about 13, this boy. And the science teacher rang her to say, I cannot believe the change in your son today. I've had to ring you because he's been, you know, lovely. We love him, but he's never been able to concentrate and focus. In today's lesson, he was amazing. He did everything, finished everything. He was brilliant. And my friend then said, she said, and now, she said, I just rang him up to congratulate him. She said, he's at home doing his homework on his own. She said, he's never done that, ever. And she said, he's already done 2/3 of it. He's just finishing the last third. And she said, that's the medication. He's only been on it 2 days.
Wow.
That's the difference it can make. It can literally, and I don't use this word lightly, transform your child. So to not try ADHD medication, very wrong. You're asking a child to struggle. And why would you ask your child to struggle when there's a medication that can put back into the brain what is missing?
And that sort of ties in with my next question, because what do you think about the health service and schools not really wanting to discuss it when kids are 5, 6 until they're like 7? Is that wrong? And
it's wrong. Children can be diagnosed from the age of 5, and they can be medicated from the age of 5.
Is that privately, do you think?
No, NHS. Our local Bucks NHS paediatrician will diagnose and medicate from the age of 5 if it's necessary. Now, the last little boy did, the little boy, lovely little boy, dear little boy, but when he saw his friends, he got so excited to see his friends, he would run up to them and bite them. And he was getting in a lot of trouble with the parents because these kids have big bite marks on their neck. And it was just excitement at seeing his friends. He loved these people so much. He didn't know what to do with his excitement, that he would just bite them. So because of that, and he also got removed from his school. He'd only been at a school for 2 weeks, and they asked him to leave because of this. And I said to his mum, I said, think of his self-esteem. Please don't go and put him in another school where this is going to happen again. We know it's going to happen again. Go and talk to the doctor who diagnosed and see if he'll medicate. And the doctor did. And he's now in another school and perfectly happy. So it's from the age of 5 is when you should be looking at it. A lot of people can see the signs of ADHD way before that. You know, usually the signs of ADHD are really obvious by about 3 or 4, really obvious. But you can start the pathway, get on that pathway to get them diagnosed when they're 5, and then if necessary medicate. There are some children that don't need it. Some children, they can focus and concentrate quite fine. Their impulsivity isn't too bad. It's not getting them into trouble. They're not running across roads or, you know, doing anything dangerous. It's not impacting friendships, and it's not impacting their education. If that's the case, I always say to parents, leave it until it becomes a problem. And then usually it becomes a problem when puberty looms. So when kids get to sort of 8 or 9, the same parents will say to me, oh, I think we're at the point it's becoming a bit of a problem. She's upsetting people now. And we're getting told she's not concentrating in class and she doesn't want to do it. And I'm like, yeah, now's the time. You know, so it's not necessary that you just grab every ADHD child and throw meds down their throat from the minute they're diagnosed. I'm not saying that, but I am saying as soon as you see the ADHD is impacting them negatively, that's the time to look at medication for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how else can we support these kids at home?
The best thing you can do, everybody, is understand the condition. And I don't say that lightly.
Read your book.
Read my book. If you there's other books, of course, but mine will explain it to you as well. Understand the brain. If you can understand how the ADHD brain works and work with it rather than against it, that's the best thing you can do for your child. I'll give you a little example about my niece. When my niece, she now does all our social media, she's amazing. But when she was 4, she didn't want her dinner one night. Now, I'd already worked out there was potential ADHD here. She really did not want her dinner. So I said to her, Isabel, it's totally your choice. You are in charge here. You can either have it at the kitchen table, you can have it at the dining table, or I can get a tray and you can sit with me on the sofa and you can have it on the sofa. It's your choice. Which do you want? Now, she looked at me murderously because she knew she'd been caught out. Because what I'd done was I just put her in charge of making that decision. And when you put an ADHD person in charge of making a decision, they cannot not tell you the answer, because their brain is always saying, I know best. I'm going to tell you how I'm going to have it. So she went, at a kitchen table. I said, fine, we'll have it at a table. And she had it at the table. What you need to do is put them in charge. Their brain likes to be in charge, even from a very young age. I'm talking 3 or 4. So once you understand that element, just that one, and there's hundreds, but if you understand that they need to be in charge, and if you want them to do something, let's say you want them to do some homework, right? If you say, okay, Katie, it's totally your choice. Do you want to do your homework now and then we'll have tea after? Or do you want me to do the tea early so you can do your homework afterwards and we've still got time for TV? Or do you want to do it, tomorrow morning before we go to school? It's totally your choice. Which one do you want? That child is much more likely to do their homework once you've put them in charge of when they're doing it. That's the biggest tip I can give you. Allow the child to feel in charge. And I always say to parents, always make the options that suit you, of course, but still allow them to feel in charge. It will work wonders. Another big one is pick your battles, pick your battles. Your example was the best. If she's eating with her hands, but she's eating and she's putting food in her mouth and she's getting the nutrients, the battle of cutlery isn't worth it. At some point, she will want to be like other people and she won't want to stand out, and she will start to naturally use a knife and fork. Or, as I said, take her shopping in John Lewis or something and find yourself in the cutlery department and just say, oh, look at that beautiful pink set. That would be lovely. Or, and get her to want something. If she wants it and thinks it, and you could say it's a bit expensive, but if you really want it, I'll get it for you. Then if it's kind of her decision, she will then use it. But I really wouldn't worry. At her age, using her hands to eat is very, very common. And as I say, if you're getting food in and she's getting the nutrients, don't worry. It's the parent where they're not eating and they're not getting the nutrients, and they have to resort to things like milkshakes with different things in to try and get the nutrients into the body. That's where your problem is. If you've got a child who just wants to eat with their hands, let her.
Yeah, well, it's very good advice. This has been so informative, and I think I've actually just diagnosed myself, because in your book, the first thing you say is that the parents have it. One of you is likely to have it.
Yeah, it's nearly always one parent, and if not one parent, 2, because ADHD adults are attracted to each other. So my partner, I've been with him nearly 7 years. It took me 2 years to realise that he's also got ADHD, and he's now diagnosed, because he presents very differently to me. And this is something very important as well. A lot of parents think, well, I've never done that, never done that, never done that. I can't have ADHD. You can, because there's different severities of it, for starters. So you might have a very severe ADHD child and you might have it mildly, but it's still hereditary. The only way ADHD is caused, if it's not hereditary, is because some children who have brain damage. So if there's brain damage at birth, that can sometimes cause it. Or if there's an accident later on as they're growing up and they have actual brain damage, that can cause ADHD. But that percentage is minute. The vast majority of people have ADHD because they've inherited it.
There's just so much to talk
about.
There's
so much to it. That's why they say, that phrase I said, ADHD is a big umbrella and a lot comes under it. People don't realise IBS. There's something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, alexithymia, dyslexithymia. There are so many conditions that can be connected to ADHD. It's incredible.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. This has been so amazing. Thanks.
Great pleasure. And I'm very happy to come back again if you want me to talk about anything else.
Oh, we should.
ADHD related, but any other aspects, I'm very happy to come back.
Yeah, brilliant. Oh, thank you so much.
Lovely. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to click subscribe and leave us a rating or review, as it really does help to get the word out there about the podcast. If you have any questions about the topics we discussed in this episode, or if there are any other subjects you'd like to hear about, please do email us at info@mybubba.com, or just reach out to us on Instagram at leo.bamford or at mybubbagram.